Hey everyone, Ashley Abraham here, Litson defense attorney and former DUI prosecutor. Today, I want to dive into DUI checkpoints. You may have seen them around certain holidays or weekends and that you ask, are these legal? And if you're stopped at one, what are your rights? Let's talk about the legal options you have for challenging the validity of a DUI checkpoint stop. First off, DUI checkpoints are legal in Tennessee, but only if they follow specific legal guidelines. Law enforcement can't just set up a checkpoint anywhere they please. There's a legal standard they need to meet to justify these stops. In Tennessee, the law requires DUI checkpoints to be conducted under a neutral plan. This means the law enforcement agency must have a predetermined, unbiased procedure for the checkpoint's location and operation. The goal is to prevent random stops that infringe on your Fourth Amendment rights. If you're charged with a DUI after a checkpoint stop, one of the first things your attorney can do is examine whether the checkpoint followed legal procedures. Here are the key points to focus on. Number 1, prior approval is required. One of the foundational requirements is that a DUI checkpoint must have pre-approval in advance by a supervising authority. This approval includes deciding the location, date, and time of the checkpoint. If the officers decided to set up a checkpoint spur of the moment without prior approval, this could be a legal red flag. When defending someone stopped at a checkpoint, we check whether the approval documents are in order. If there was no pre-approval, or if the location just wasn't justified, we can argue that the checkpoint didn't meet legal standards. Number 2, visibility and warning signs. Another key requirement is visibility. Law enforcement must make it clear to drivers that they are approaching a checkpoint. There should be signs, flashing lights, and ideally a uniformed officer signaling drivers to stop. Why is this so important? Without proper signage, the checkpoint might come as a complete surprise, which could be dangerous and confusing for drivers. Courts look unfavorably on poorly marked checkpoints, as they create an environment that's dangerous to drivers and officers alike. If it wasn't clear you're approaching a DUI checkpoint, we might be able to challenge a stop on those grounds. Point number 3, neutral stopping patterns. The next factor is how officers decide which vehicle to stop. They can't simply stop every vehicle or randomly choose drivers. Instead, they're required to follow a predetermined natural pattern, like stopping every third car, for instance. If an officer arbitrarily decided to pull over your vehicle or broke the predetermined pattern, that could render the stop invalid. This lack of neutrality can be grounds to argue that the checkpoint was unconstitutional, which can potentially lead to a dismissal of any of the charges that arose from it. Number 4, minimizing intrusion and detention time. Even if the checkpoint is legally valid, officers must conduct stops efficiently to avoid unnecessary delays. They're required to keep the intrusion minimal and not detain drivers for longer than necessary to determine whether they're impaired. If your stop at a checkpoint resulted in a lengthy delay without reasonable cause, that could be challenged. Courts have emphasized that checkpoints should be quick interactions. Anything more can be argued that it's an unlawful detention. Number 5, officer training and conduct. Finally, let's talk about the officers themselves. Were they properly trained for the checkpoint? Did they follow their training and protocols for conducting these stops professionally and lawfully? Officers at DUI checkpoints must adhere to specific procedures, especially administering field sobriety tests or breathalyzer tests. Improper conduct or failure to follow standard procedures could be grounds to challenge the checkpoint stop. This includes failure to properly administer tests, coercing drivers into tests, or even aggressive behavior that might affect the driver's ability to comply with instructions. So what should you do if you find yourself at a checkpoint? Number 1, stay calm and comply with basic instructions. You should present your license and registration if asked, but remember, you're not required to answer questions beyond that. Number 2, know your rights. You have the right to refuse field sobriety tests, although this may have consequences, especially if you're later charged. Number 3, contact a defense attorney. If you're charged with a DUI, a defense attorney can investigate the legality of the checkpoint to build your case. In sum, DUI checkpoints must meet strict guidelines to be legally valid. If any of these procedures were missed or mishandled, it could open up options to challenge the legality of the checkpoint stop and potentially the charges that resulted from it. So if you or someone you know has been stopped and charged at a DUI checkpoint, give us a call at Litson. We'll make sure everything was done by the book, and if it wasn't, we'll work hard to defend your rights. Thanks for tuning in, and remember to stay informed about your rights on the road.